My name's Sarah Tahamtani. I'm a partner in the Employment and Business Immigration Unit here at Clarion. Tell you a little bit about my passion and my kind of day job. So I'm interested in what people do with people, how they get them to be productive, how they get them to be engaged, what happens when we fall out with people, ultimately what happens when they end up in employment tribunal. So really the whole remit, the whole kind of breadth of anything to do with people, how you employ them, how you motivate them, how you get the best out of them, and how you move them on. So that's kind of my day job, looking externally and internally within our organisation. Employee engagement is at the heart of what we do and a huge part of our growth and values and behaviours. So that's kind of my focus externally and internally. For the purposes of today, I'm going to be focusing on the social aspect of ESG, which is typically measured by how an organisation interacts with its workforce, its customers and its wider community. I suppose social factors are wide-reaching by definition, but when I was thinking about it and trying to simplify it, because we could easily spend half a day, or I could spend half a day talking about equality legislation and employment law. So just trying to kind of categorise it for you, I'd say they fall into three main groups. For me, they are pay and working practices, workforce engagement, and diversity, equality and inclusion. So I think broadly, everything that you hear about in terms of the ESG agenda falls into those three categories. So I'll touch on the issues that fall in each of those groups before I introduce our next guest speaker. So the first one is pay and working practices. In the context of ESG, I suppose the focus really is on looking at how you incentivise, remunerate, reward and recognise your employees. And that is increasingly becoming more driven by data and metrics. So trying to avoid either conscious or unconscious bias. And that's also been driven by legislation in terms of gender pay gap reporting, ethnicity reporting, and looking at the difference in pay between men, women, different racial groups, and others with protected characteristics. There's also been a movement towards aligning incentives or remuneration to ESG plans. So moving away from incentivising people to earn an annual bonus and more towards working towards a long-term performance plan that's aligned to an ESG agenda. So there certainly has been a move towards how people are remunerated and what it is that senior execs are measured on. And of course, we're in the middle of a cost of living crisis and the living wage, so employers are having to address their mind more to what impact that has for their workforce and their workforce engagement, which was the second category that I flagged. What we see more increasingly is a quiet discontent amongst the workforce. So an increasing number of people raising grievances, going through a formal process, blowing the whistle or taking strike action. And there's a reason for that. It's not purely as a result of what the employer is doing, but there are a number of contributing factors which make it more difficult to increase engagement and productivity. And all of that, I suppose, leads into diversity, equality and inclusion. And in that space, it's nothing, for me, it's nothing new. We've always had equality legislation. We've always had discrimination law. We've always had 9 protected characteristics and lots of other ways in which to bring those claims. But I think what's happened is that there's an increased awareness in society, whether it's because people have become more reflective post-pandemic, whether it's triggered by Black Lives Matters or other marginalised groups. There certainly is a demand for minority groups to be listened to and encouraged and promoted in the same way as others are. And I think what good business leaders have come to realise is that that makes really good business sense, because actually having that level of diversity, there's a clear correlation between diversity and engagement and productivity and growth. So actually it makes completely good business sense, and increasingly when pitching for work, that is a measure upon which your employee engagement, attrition, is a measure that is a real factor in terms of business continuity. So, as I said, I could talk all day about diversity, equality and inclusion, but I won't do, because we've got a really good guest speaker to follow. But what is interesting to me, and there's lots of forums within Clarion to have this discussion if you're interested, grab me separately. But what is interesting is all those people issues come at a time where there's also a massive shortage of resource. So recently, I mean, not in manufacturing, but in retail, we were holidaying in this country and I saw a sign that said, "Please be kind, the whole world is short-staffed." And it really, we were just waiting for ice cream, but it just.
We've been waiting a long time.
I took a breath and thought, yeah, right, I get it. So the whole world is short-staffed, whilst actually what we were fearful of during the pandemic was that unemployment would be at record highs, and actually it's quite the opposite, because people have had time to reflect and their deal with their employers has changed. So what they're willing to do for what they're receiving has completely changed. So the bargain has shifted and the employer has found itself in a difficult position to attract, retain loyal staff. And that's having a real life impact, but it's also in the context of everything else. So whether it's diversity, pay, or engagement. So it's really important that your values are really aligned with your ESG agenda. And then we have people like Steve Freer and Tempus Novo who can help us with some of those issues. So I'll tell you a little bit about Steve. He holds his breath. Steve will introduce himself, but the first time I heard what this award-winning charity did, I was really moved by what they're achieving, because their values are based on equality and giving people a second chance. And it also made good business sense, as Steve and I have mutual clients where Steve and his co-founder Val have made a real difference in terms of that recruitment agenda, whilst actually doing something that's great within the community. So Steve spends most of his time talking to ministers and at various political party conferences. So I'm very grateful for his time this morning, and I'm worried that I've talked you up too much. So I'm
Not as worried as I am.
So I'm going to stop talking and let Steve take the floor, and so we can focus on recruitment.
Thank you, Sarah. Gosh. Yes, I do spend quite a bit of time speaking to MPs and ministers and influencing prison policy and prison reform. So I'm Steve Freer, I'm the CEO and founder of Tempus Novo. Tempus Novo being a charity which supports people with convictions into sustainable employment, and I stress the word sustainable. Why on earth would you help people who have caused misery and crime? Well, having worked for 30 years in prisons and seen these people more than capable of doing a good day's work, and then digging behind actually why have they committed these crimes, and you find that, I think statistically it's something like 60% of people that are in and out of prison regularly, which people will be horrified at, but just to give you an example, the first 70 people that we worked with had between them over 1,000 convictions, and that's from the PNC, Police National Computer, which got me excited actually, because I thought, well, we can have a huge impact not working with big numbers. And obviously the bigger the number, the less the quality usually, isn't it? We're all had to be about quality, because we're working with essentially broken humans who needed trust and support. So, having worked in the prisons for 30 years and seen guys in and out, same faces, a colleague of mine, Val, who's away on holiday at the moment, and co-founder, we got our heads together and thought, there's got to be something better than what currently exists. We're pretty much warehousing people at prisons. Certainly the prisons I worked in. I started in 1986, back in at Wormwood Scrubs in London. And that were a hell of a baptism of fire, I can tell you. And I locked up some very difficult people. Charlie Bronson a couple of times. At Scrubs, I got a transfer to Leeds and he followed me. I think 6 months later, I found I was locking him up at Leeds prison. And we just thought there's got to be something better than this, than just warehousing and sending people out, in some cases worse than when they came in. So we use all our knowledge and experience, 60 years joint. We did a lot of research to see what actually is out there, and there was nothing. Forgive me, there was. James Timpson, he's the trailblazer for this work. Timpson's shoe repairs. So James started doing this work about 30 years ago, I believe. A very giving and philanthropic family altogether, the Timpsons. And I was lucky enough to do some work at Leeds Prison with some of his staff working with offenders. And one of the first things that struck me was how we turned up with all the records for the lads so you could look at what they'd done, the previous convictions. And this guy said, not interested in that. And we're thinking, well, you must be interested in it. You want to know what they've done. This is what I want to do, is I want to see what's in here and I want to know what's in here. And that's what I'm basing my judgment on. He says, and then I'll look at the records. So we adopted that into Tempus Novo because clearly you could be frightened off, even with our expertise, knowledge, experience of prisons. You could be frightened off a little bit by some of the crimes that maybe these people had committed, or the number of crimes. So we adopted that policy and it's worked very well for us. Again, why would we help people who have caused crime? Well, we want to reduce crime. We want to reduce victims. And we want people's hard-paying, earned tax-paying money to be used wisely. So hence we came up with the idea that we were going to now go out into the working world, speak to local businesses and put a model together that we felt they could work with. And when I say model, we do exclude certain offence types, because if I was an employer and I've built a reputation and a brand over tens and sometimes hundreds of years, then I want to protect that, and it's our duty to continue to do that. So we don't work with sex offenders, for example. We don't work with murderers. We don't work anyone associated with terrorism or arson. However, thankfully, that's a small percentage of crime. It still leaves us with tens of thousands of people to work with nationally as we grow. I think there's currently 80,000 people in prison, but there's 230,000 who have got out of prison and are under supervision of probation and have exactly that same barrier to getting a job. So prison really is just one part of it. It's the conviction that stops you getting a job. And some people we work with haven't been to prison. They've got convictions and they've served the sentences in community. Risk's obviously massive. We take the risk out. We are experts in this field, there's no question. We have access to prison systems, indirect access to probation and police systems, so we don't leave a stone unturned. But you'd probably be surprised that I personally feel that the biggest reason that we're successful with this is because we care. We actually care about the people that we're helping, and we can build a relationship. And I've brought today with me one of our caseworkers and our ESG ambassador, believe it or not, because the work that they do day in, day out is just unbelievable. And they need that support, that person they can turn to. It might be a Saturday morning, I don't fancy going to work today, I've put my name down for overtime. well, I'm sorry, mate, but if you don't turn up, just think back to F Wing at Leeds Prison, because that's where you're going to be back to. And so you need that tough love element as well. And it does work when you're realistic, I think, about life as well. It helps. So we're now at a stage where over 8 years we've placed 703 people into work with who otherwise would be, without a shadow of a doubt, certainly out of work, and half of them, statistically say, half of them probably back in prison. The economics stack up. That was another thing that excited me when I was doing my research. It's now £48,000 to keep somebody in prison for a year. The last calculation on reoffending costs for the UK was in 2018, and that came out at £18.1 billion. So when you think, I suppose statistically, if we've placed 703, the government say that half of them wouldn't have gone back to prison. You're certainly saving they'd all be on benefits, so you're saving that, plus you're saving the 48k per year times 351.5, I think it is. So it's big money saved. We are progressing slowly but surely. We've now got an office in Milton Keynes. It tends to be entry-level work, and we can't solve your workforce problem, I'm afraid, but we can help. Because, again, I think the figure's 60 to 65% of people who are in and out of prison have the reading and writing ability of an 11-year-old. The reason for that is they've been born into dysfunctional families, usually, where mum's possibly operating illegally somehow, dad's an alcoholic, a drug addict, he's in and out of prison. And I think it's important, actually, just to think about that for a second and think, where would I have been if I'd have had that start in life? Not sat here with a suit on, maybe in front of a judge with a suit on. But it's as simple as that, actually. Poverty is the driver of crime. Certainly 50 to 60% of it. I'd argue more now, but as a minimum. And if we were able to address that, then just think of the possibilities there. I mean, it's phenomenal. And these are things I talk to ministers about. That's for them to deal with, not me. But we have improved slightly how prisons are running through TN. Certain prisoners can now access apprenticeships. That change came about after Dominic Raab and his team came to see us in February, and we had Clipper with us because they've employed over 250 people from us, which is phenomenal. So they're winning big contracts through the S in their ESG, certainly government contracts. They won the PPE contract through COVID. I'm proud to say, obviously, a big part of that was the S in the ESG, the decision making. And Tony Mannix, who was their CEO, said to Dominic Raab, well, I think it's ridiculous that prisoners can't do apprenticeships. Now, I challenged Gillian Keegan previously, who was the Minister for Work and Pensions at the time, and I got a pretty poor answer, if I'm honest. He went away and changed the law. So from, I think, any time now, we've got some lads starting apprenticeships through Clipper. Makes so much sense. The S in the ESG, for me personally, it is really, really important. And I'd just like to thank Sarah actually for inviting us here today, because it's exciting for me to be in a room full of people who are providing jobs and keeping the economy going. I take my hat off to you all. It's probably what's the most difficult time ever, certainly in our lifetimes. And I get how difficult it must be for you to adapt the ESG agenda. But I do genuinely believe, and I've seen evidence of it, it was alluded to earlier about trillions of pounds investment. I genuinely believe that those companies who make that extra effort to comply will benefit massively going forward. As I say, I've seen evidence it with Clipper. We do work with manufacturers ourselves. We'll work, when I say any company, that's not true. We'll work with companies that have the similar values to ourselves. So we check out actually what's the culture within that business. Because like I said earlier, we've got broken people that need probably a little bit of additional support. Most of it comes from us. But there might be the odd time where they need to a shoulder to cry on, or a kick up the backside, whatever it be. So we need companies that are aligned to our values to work with us. And where we are now actually is it's just a resourcing issue and funding. The growth opportunities are coming at us every day, because people realise that the funnel we use to filter out those who we believe aren't ready for work, and who are too big a risk, then we're producing some really, really good talent actually. As I said earlier, the lower entry level work. But that leads to other opportunities. And these people who, as I said earlier, have come from poverty, they can now put food on the table for the families and not have to commit crime to get money. And you'd be surprised how many of them actually want that. Not the younger end, I have to say. They're happy selling drugs and earning £1,000 a week and having nice trainers. That's the reality. But when they hit the mid-20s, early 30s, get married, have a child, responsibilities. I've even heard lads say to me, when I've said to them, what is it that will change your mind and make you realise that you want to change your path? And I've had lads say to me, well, next time I'm in the dock, it's double figures. So that's actually an issue as well, as they climb through the ranks of the criminal ladder. So yeah, we're on a great path. We can't help everybody, but we don't want to help everybody because we want to keep it real. We want it to work. We want to continue to produce quality. Don't work for everybody. I think out of every 10 people we put into work, something like 7.5 stick beyond 6 months that we track them. But we put in place as well, which I'm going to ask Becky to talk about, which she'll kill me for. But the support element is absolutely vital. It's okay getting somebody and introducing them to a business and saying off you go. That's no good for the person, it's no good for the business. There needs to be somebody to pick the phone up to and offer support and make sure that they understand the budgeting. Because again, if you've got 60%, I think our figures actually are near 90% of people that come through our doors have come from extreme poverty, very little education, dysfunctional upbringing. Most of them, in fact, I think it's 1 in 3 now that are entering custody have gone through the care system. Many of them have been abused in care. And I go back to that question earlier, had we have had that horrific start in life, where would we be? So we get a tremendous amount of reward from what we do. When you see someone who you've helped in work 3, 6, 9 months on, whatever it is, and they're so grateful, it's unbelievable. Which from an employer point of view, it must be music to your ears, it would be mine. An employee who was grateful for the opportunity, probably at first to work all day with a smile on the face and last to leave and want to do overtime. In fact, we work with a company in Morley, manufacturer, one of our early companies, and I remember taking 3 lads for interview because we take them, we support them right through the journey. And the operations manager came out and he went, "Can I have a word with you, Steve?" And I thought, oh shit, no, this isn't a good start. I haven't interviewed people with that level of motivation for years. And I thought, we're on to something. So anyway, that obviously gives you motivation and inspiration to carry on, because it's not an easy area to work in. As charities go, it's not the first one. You can't go rattling a bucket round Sainsbury's. They'll probably take the money out rather than put it in. But it's again, the perception of prisons and prisoners is so way off the mark. It's unbelievable. One of the things that we did early doors, we used as a hook. We'd say to a CEO or a director, "Will you work with us? This is what we do." let me think about it. Would you come to prison and have a look round? We'll take you. Oh, when can I do that then? So they're not coming actually to listen to Tempus Novo. They're going to have a look round Armley Jail, probably somewhere they've driven past for years and thought, oh, I wonder what happens in there. And we'll take them round, and it's the regime's as it is. There's nothing staged. And that was another really defining moment, because I remember an employer had stopped to talk to a couple of lads. And who's this boss? Is this a new governor? No, he's a local employer thinking of giving people like you an opportunity. Can I just shake your hand? And they'd be like, I say, yeah, you can shake his hand. And you could see them and they'd go, good God, the human. And that is a massive, massive thing, because society's perception of people in prison is that they're all murderers and rapists and lunatics. And it's so far from the truth. But the 60% that have the reading and writing ability of an 11-year-old, you have to feel for, I think. And we had to find a way of creating a bit of empathy with the model, because obviously, again, it's crime and criminals, and we always jumped at worst case scenario. We've eliminated the risk. It still leaves us with a big cohort of people who, A, we can work with, and B, we know the majority will turn out to be hard-working and loyal employees. The ESG, so we've gone from HMP to ESG, I suppose. And I didn't know the first thing about it. I knew about CSR, but I got fascinated, because the more I looked, the more I thought, yeah, this is absolutely right. Those who work the hardest should get the most, actually. You know, that makes sense. So we work hard as a little organisation as well to provide, to comply with ESG. And I suppose we're recycling humans as well, in a way. You know, we've got people who, they do get on that cycle of crime where once they've got a conviction, they know they can't get a job. I know one lad, he put 200 applications in, didn't hear a thing back. In fact, he was just going to go back to crime when he heard of us, and we gave him a hand up. I think that was 3 years ago. He's now gone on, he's got his HGV licence, and he's earning good money, and he'll never look back. So it's a win-win-win, really. I mean, it's a win because we're reducing crime. It's a win because there's less victims. It's a win because there's less on benefits. It's a win because we've got good employees who are grateful for a job. And it's a win for society because we've got a more prosperous community. So although, as I say, not massive numbers at the moment, it is growing. Our vision for the future is to have 6 hubs around the UK. We're hopefully Manchester next year, we're number 3. Placing between 100 and 150 people into work per hub, so just about 1,000 people per annum who otherwise would be, certainly 50% of them, back in prison, and most of them on benefits as a minimum. So that's our plan going forward. I just had a bit of a wave of 5 minutes, I think, so I could go on all day. It's a passion. You know, what a great feeling to get out of bed every day and know you're making a difference to somebody's life, but not only their life, their children's lives, their grandchildren's lives. It's intergenerational change. It's so powerful. And I said to our staff, I'd been on holiday last week and I came back, and I think it was Sue this morning, she says, are you glad to be back off your holiday? I says, every day's a bloody holiday at Tempus Novo. I said, that's what it feels like. It's such a great place to be. Just so that you can see a little bit of the evidence of what I've been talking about, this is a little video showing some of the people we've helped and supported, and employers.
Go back in time and talk to my younger self, I'd probably tell myself not to be an idiot. Apply for jobs places, they don't want to give you a job because you've got a criminal record.
The key to the prison crisis really is not what happens in prison, it's what happens when prisoners leave. And the key to solving the reoffending problem is employment.
Now, Tempus Novo are challenging in their own small way, but quite successfully, the nation's attitude towards offenders.
It wasn't for them, then I don't think I'd have made the changes that I have. They've been hard to find a job with a criminal record.
It's opened doors and given me an opportunity that I otherwise would not have been given.
My life is
is a lot better.
I can go home knackered, but I can go home with a smile on my face and provide for my kids.
It's changed my life enormously. If I wouldn't be working, then I'd probably be back in prison.
Everything revolves around work and earning money and having a living and having a life.
If they've got fire in their bellies and a real hunger to change and to be helped and to help themselves, we'll give them as much support as we possibly can to make it work for the long term.
It's a fact that employment gives an offender the best opportunity of a new life. Many of them are just crying out for a second chance.
And we're around about 3 months into it. So far, I have to say, the work ethic, how they've joined the organisation, how they've fitted in with the team has been first rate, and it bodes well for the future.
Prison is the punishment. The punishment shouldn't extend after you leave jail and serve your time. And what Tempus Novo has been able to do effectively is be the liaison between ex-offenders and employers.
Without doubt, it's been Tempus Novo who have coached, counselled, mentored both the ex-offenders and managers to create this partnership.
And anyone who's from the business world, if you can support this venture and give these guys a fresh start in life, then I think you'd be doing your bit to society as well.
Staggering saving for the taxpayer.
Other people out there in similar situations who perhaps are business people who can help us.
Steve and Val at Tempus Novo, they wanted to help ex-offenders find employment.
Everybody deserves a second chance.
Some of them just need help, guidance, mentoring, role models.
You can't tell me you weren't moved. I hope you were moved. Thank you, Steve. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. I suppose just to wrap up that section, one thought is think about the concept of recycling people and giving them a second chance. Think about, everyone says be kind, but just think about humankind and doing the right thing. And trust when I say that it will pay you back in spades in terms of not just a tick box exercise in terms of your ESG agenda, but in spades in terms of your business growth.
So our plan going forward is that we work with these big players who can take on, not to exclude the smaller companies completely, but who can take on bigger numbers of people and therefore feel they're getting more value and therefore pay for it. And we think that we can achieve somewhere in the region of 60% revenue on costings, and the other 40% we will then get willingly from your Tudor Trusts, your Henry Smiths, because they're they know they're spending their money well, and we have tremendous relationships with us. And it's important. Relationships is everything. If you're not transparent and you can't provide the evidence, then unfortunate, we're the opposite. We want to provide that. We want to be challenged on, actually, do you work hard when you get out of bed and make a difference? So yeah, exciting times ahead, I think, for TN.
Steve, Becky, thank you so much for your time and experience.
Thank you.